U53RDV, a true story. A very typical feature of video games are cheats or tricks, whose functions are to alter the gameplay or make certain visual changes. In some they are activated through menus where certain values are inserted, in others by pressing specific buttons, or in more complex cases, changing the game completely, and Plants vs. Zombies is no exception. All these tricks are activated by means of certain writings that we will have to do on our keyboard. However, there is a trick that makes the whole game change in a very drastic way, and not for good. And not only that, but another thing that differentiates this cheat from the others is that it cannot be activated at the moment we want, but we have to write it in a specific part of the game. To write it in a specific part of the game, today I'm going to tell you about a very strange experience I had with this game, which has to do with this supposed hack that I mentioned earlier. And I hope I don't make the terrible mistake of activating it again. It was about 9 p.m. I was on my laptop getting ready to record my weekly PvZ gameplay. I had activated my screen recorder before I opened the game to make sure everything was in order and there weren't any misconfigurations. Until then, everything was perfectly normal. But once the game had finished loading, I was surprised to find that I was asked to create a new profile. At first I was pretty upset. I thought I had lost my progress permanently and for no reason. However, remembered that I wanted to back up my save, but apparently instead of copying my save file, I moved to another site. I wanted to close the game to, now, make a copy of my game and restore everything, but the game wouldn't let me exit. I had to create a profile to exit, so I typed anything, and it came out, U53RDV. And this was the first step for the strange thing to start. When I clicked accept, the screen went black and a warning appeared that said the following. Warning. A command has been written that will activate developer mode for this game. Continue anyway? When I read that, I was excited. I started to imagine all the possibilities that I could have with developer mode, and without a second thought, I clicked yes. Unexpectedly the game crashed. I assumed this was because the game needed to be restarted in order to activate developer mode. I was surprised to see that the name and icon of the game changed a bit. Eagerly, I opened the game to see what changes there were, but the changes were something totally different from what I expected. The game became very strange, even somewhat diabolical, at least that's how I perceived it. Everything was distorted. When I entered the menu, everything looked unpleasant. The username was not the one I put in, but it was replaced by developer, which I did not find any sense in. I saw everything. It was dark, pretty nasty for such an innocent game. I don't know what the hell this had to do with developer mode. Unfortunately, humans are too curious, so I went to look at the game options to see what changes they had. Everyone had changed in a nasty way. My whole game was complete. It was just as I had left it before this, but it was not at all normal that there were all these strange changes. I noticed that in the shower of the Zen garden a speech bubble appeared, which, instead of having the usual drop of water, said help. I clicked on it to see what it meant, but the game closed. I was afraid to open it again. I felt that something was wrong, but I didn't want to be left with the intrigue that other things had changed, and I decided to open the Ame Decided to open the game again, a serious mistake. This time, I decided to enter Crazy Dave's store. Luckily, I was able to enter without problems. However, Dave looked somewhat bugged. He had no body, just his head and arms floating in the air, and he didn't say anything. He stared, smiling. I went back to the main menu as I was starting to get nervous. I had the premonition that, at any moment, a screamer was going to jump out at me. Enter the almanac, and this was what was most interesting to me, since even the characters underwent changes. In the part of the plants, the changes were not so drastic. Some had their normal design, others were crying or had a sad expression like the pea shooter or the sunflowers. some, like the carrion eating plant or the spikeweed, had blood, and others like the rammer their eyes were blank. However, the zombies had one change in common, and that is that they all had empty eyes. Completely black, and some had blood on their faces. Finally, I decided to enter adventure mode. When clicking, the zombie hand appeared as usual, but the music and the sound were extremely loud. It was a deafening noise that luckily didn't last long. The screen went black for a few seconds. After a while, it recovered. The garden also changed a bit, since everything had a red filter. In this part, one was curious to see what it felt like to play a level with these changes. I chose my plants and started the level. At the beginning, the letters, instead of saying ready, set, plant, they said prepare to die. I got a little nervous, but I continued with the level. The first zombie appeared and I began to prepare my defense. Although there was also a change here, and it was that when the P hit the zombie, it spurted a little blood. However, there was something more gloomy, and that is that when the zombies died, they left a pool of blood where they fell. This was already a PlantsVSZombies too dark. From then on, everything continued normally. Nothing out of the ordinary apart from the aforementioned changes. I even began to forget my fears and was beginning to entertain myself. This made me trust myself to such an extent that I thought that nothing bad would happen. As I reached the end of the level, some questions were still running through my head, such as, why this looks so creepy? Why the word help in the Zen garden? Why the developer mode? I kept playing, and finally, I reached the last horde. I just had to wait for the plants to eliminate the remaining zombies. Finally, I had completed the level, but when I clicked on the bag of coins, the screen went black and started to hear biting sounds. The zombies had eaten all my plants, and out of nowhere, I lost level. Instead of the usual message when you lose the level, blood stains appeared all over the screen, and the scream seemed like it would never end. However, I realized that my laptop had completely locked up. I couldn't close it. Nothing. It was paralyzed, but for some reason the recording kept working. I knew that sooner or later the blue screen would appear. I took out my cell phone and started recording my laptop. Finally, the blue screen appeared. Even though I was already expecting it, I felt too scared. I felt that something would appear on the screen at any moment, and unfortunately, it was. The blue screen disappeared, and suddenly, an image of a deformed zombie, with a giant mouth and red eyes, appeared, with a loud and frightening sound in the background. Quickly, I tried to forcefully turn off the laptop, but it did not respond. No matter how hard I pressed the off button, nothing happened, while the image multiplied and deformed more and more. I managed to make the image and text disappear, but the sounds went on and on and on. Sometimes one was more horrible than another. The laptop was still unresponsive. Although I kept pressing the off button, already tired, I decided to close it with a strong blow. I had no other choice, fortunately. I managed to calm her down. I realized that my laptop had gotten to nothing. It was paralyzed, but for some reason the recording kept working. I knew that sooner or later the blue screen would appear. I took out my cell phone and started recording my laptop. Finally, the blue screen appeared. Even though I was already expecting it, I felt too scared. I felt that something would appear on the screen at any moment, and unfortunately, it was. The blue screen disappeared, and suddenly, an image of a deformed zombie, with a giant mouth and red eyes, appeared, with a loud and frightening sound in the background. Quickly, I tried to forcefully turn off the laptop, but it did not respond. No matter how hard I pressed the off button, nothing happened, while the image multiplied and deformed more and more. I managed to make the image and text disappear, but the sounds went on and on and on. Sometimes one was more horrible than another. The laptop was still unresponsive. Although I kept pressing the off button, already tired, I decided to close it with a strong blow. I had no other choice, fortunately. I managed to calm her down. I I realized that my laptop had gotten too hot. For obvious reasons, I didn't want to turn it back on. The next day, I took my laptop and touched it to see how it was doing. I couldn't believe it, it was still a little warm. But it was a temperature that I could handle being turned on, so, with some fear, I turned it on hoping that nothing from the event of the night before it would have affected it somewhat. To my luck and relief, it started without any problem. However, I immediately uninstalled the game and decided to avoid it for at least a few weeks. Later, I started to check my email to see if there was anything interesting, but to my horror, I received a message whose sender I could not believe. It was a user called U53RDV, the same name that I used to activate the device mode. Developer. The message was in English. Translated, it said this: "You found out what the game was going to be. I was one of the developers of PlantsVSZombies. I wanted the game to have a more realistic look, but they rejected my idea, and after some discussion, we got to insults, and this got me fired. As revenge, backed the computers where the game was. Versions of this game. Congratulations, you were the first victim to find my version. Now as long as you have the game installed, your computer and all your data will be sent to me. And don't bother trying to uninstall it, as once this email is marked as read, a virus will be installed that will force your computer to have the game installed permanently. Thanks for playing. Sincerely, U53RDV." Fortunately, I uninstalled the game before that supposed virus was downloaded by reading the mail. Reading that message has made my desire to have the game go down even more. And until now, I don't have Plants vs. Zombies, and the absence of this game on my laptop may continue for a while. This has been the worst experience I've ever had playing Plants vs. Zombies. And I hope that not only with this game, but with the others to avoid going through something similar again. Aftermath. Whenever I try to open back up the game, it goes back to the same zombie face. Don't try it.